So I guess we're going to start here pretty soon. So I guess you guys all probably know this is Phil Garrity. He'll be giving us a talk, the wounded healer. And I got to meet him a couple years ago, actually, so I've heard him talk about 3 or 4 times now. It's always pretty good. I think he does a good kind of theological and thinking about more of the spiritual aspect of health, too, while we go through all this. So let's welcome Phil.
Okay. Is this hello? Yeah, that's on. Okay. And then do we have to hit anything on this?
I think you should just click.
Is it recording now?
Yeah, it's recording.
Oh, okay. So we just yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. I'm super honored to be here again. I was here last year, my first time in Omaha, giving a somewhat similar. I think I only did this once. So I'm just going to worry about that. Somewhat similar talk, and it's definitely going to be drawing on some of the same experiences, but luckily I've got a couple new ones which I think are really important. This past summer in particular, I was working as a hospital chaplain in San Francisco, and so I'm going to be kind of pulling out some stories from that experience, but also as a way of kind of building on these other life experiences that have helped kind of inform my take on healthcare and illness and the intersection with spirituality, which I think is a really crucial one. So the title of this talk is The Wounded Healer, Lessons on Caregiving from Hospital Chaplaincy. And what I wanted to do this time, which I didn't really do last year, was sort of give at least a somewhat abbreviated version of what has kind of got me to this point and what are the different threads here that are informing this presentation. So I kind of want to run through that really quickly. So not the first step of all of this, because there were 18 years before I started at UCLA, but I'm from California. I was at this beautiful place in California for 4 years. I was studying international development and Spanish. I was also pre-med by the end of college after reading Mountains Beyond Mountains, which is a book about Paul Farmer and others who helped co-found an NGO called Partners In Health. And I was really, really inspired, like a lot of people these days involved in healthcare, but more specifically global health work, have been and continue to be. So that's where I kind of started before I ventured to Peru after college, where I was working full-time with a few different NGOs before I started with the sister organization of Partners in Health called Socios en Salud. They're based in Lima, which is a huge sprawling metropolis of Peru, and more specifically they're working with tuberculosis patients in the sort of outskirts of Lima. So this is a picture of a region in what's called the Cono Norte, the northern cone of the city. Lots of these kind of slum dwellings going up into the hills of this very arid desert-like, almost moon-like kind of landscape. So I was doing work there, getting involved with monitoring and evaluation, which is the team that I would then join when I moved to Boston, to the headquarters of Partners in Health. And monitoring and evaluation, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically doing impact assessment of our clinical programs. And it's not as sort of precise and high resolution as a lot of evaluation research would be. We call it operational research because it's more like trying to get a sense of what's working, what's not working, and how to make it better. So I really appreciated that because it gives you the opportunity to be working on a very kind of low-level look at what's happening on the ground and how the operations are working, but also a higher level look at kind of programmatically the workflows and the data flows and how to kind of optimize operations. So it's a really, really exciting time working, at the sort of hub, the epicenter of this organization, like I said, that I really idolized and I continue to have such admiration for. And so after that point, I was planning on doing medical school. I was actually going to head to UCLA to do what a lot of you guys are doing right now, training in medicine, and I decided not to do that. for a lot of different reasons, which I won't really go into, but it was the right decision for me. And so whereas I thought I was kind of steering away from medical education, I actually dove right into it because a few weeks after withdrawing my acceptance from UCLA, I was diagnosed with bone cancer in my right knee. This is a very kind of poor, low-quality image of my two knees, and my right knee there is got a pretty big tumor in it, malignant tumor. And so, like I said, it was this very interesting, is a weird word to use there, but sort of deflection away from medical school and sort of that kind of education and right back into it, but more on the experiential side of it, right, as a patient. And so I would do 9 months of treatment, chemotherapy, and surgery to remove a lot of the bone in my leg and replace it with metal. I did that at the Brigham and Dana-Farber, which are two big hospitals in Boston, where a lot of my Partners in Health colleagues worked, or at least they kind of they wear many hats, and a lot of them were doctors there. So I had this amazing community of people who were kind of banding together to really kind of support me through that time. This is a great picture of some of my colleagues in Rwanda, also from the Boston office, but a lot of Rwandan colleagues who they sort of made these bracelets for me when I was doing treatment. And so that's them kind of showing their support during that time in the middle of my year of treatment. And that's me on the very last day, 241 days after my diagnosis, last day of treatment. And I finished that almost 3 years ago. So the next step after that, actually, a couple more things happened. I went back to PIH. I had an amazing year traveling and working with them, and then I left PIH and I started divinity school. So right now I've been studying theology, and particularly as it pertains to care of the sick. And so I'm doing a lot of cool, often kind of abstract and seemingly impractical studies around the theological and existential dimensions of illness. And I'm at Harvard Divinity School now, which is a wonderful place for me to do that. And so the next step for me, I'm not really sure. But one thing that very recently I'm starting to dip back into is trying to start to build out a palliative care program with our clinical operations in Rwanda and Haiti. There's sort of been some fledgling efforts already, but we're hoping to kind of formalize that a bit more and really devote more serious resources and kind of human power to both pain management and palliative care, which is a frustratingly simple thing to use a highly effective and cheap drug like morphine to prevent unnecessary pain for not just oncology patients, but really across all sort of clinical categories of disease and trauma. So that's kind of an exciting thing that I think might be a cool way to sort of bridge the global health work that I've been doing with this newer sort of study and practice in the ministerial kind of spiritual side of things. So that I just wanted to kind of say as a high-level intro, but somewhat detailed, to just sort of give you a sense of what's informing this and what I'm kind of bringing into this kind of reflection, really, which is it's a very rhetorical presentation. These are things that I kind of chewed on and are really thought-provoking and interesting for me, but also really personally meaningful. And I think that they're important ideas for anyone within a healing and caring profession to think about and to really take seriously, because it can often be kind of pushed aside with so much technical focus on disease treatment. So this first kind of section here, I dramatically titled "Finding Ourselves Empty-Handed." And the first story here that I wanted to talk about is it's from this past summer when I was doing chaplaincy work. And it's actually just before that time. I showed up to California from Boston, and I got a call a few days before I was about to start my chaplaincy internship. And a very good friend of mine was in the hospital for suicidal ideation. And this was a total surprise to me, but I got the call, and it was strange that I was even there in the same city at the time. But I showed up, and he let me come back into the room that he was in. He was lying down and trying to kind of calm down. He had sort of had this panic attack and was feeling unsafe. And so we were sitting there, sort of in the dark. And the first thing he said to me, he said, that wasn't the first thing he said to me. That's kind of the punchline of this. The first thing he said to me was, I don't know how you spent so many nights in a place like this. And he was referring to my sort of, my cancer treatment. And I didn't really know what to say. I didn't say a whole lot, but I started to kind of talk about, I think it would have been hard for you, but you would have really it would have strengthened something in you. I was trying to speak from my own experience, but I was sort of also in this mode of like, I am scared of losing my friend, and I need to do something right now to kind of give him hope, to infuse some sort of inspiration in him, to save his life. And he sort of cut me off at a certain point, and he said this. He said, I don't want you to preach at me. And it sort of stopped me in my tracks, because I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize I was doing that. And yet it really was such an important and kind of instructive thing for me to hear, because it really made me look hard at what I was doing in that interaction and what kind of presence I had in that moment that was very precarious and scary, but really sort of what role I was inhabiting and what I was trying to give to him in that moment. So a few days later, I started my chaplaincy internship, and I was dealing with patients. And funny enough, I'm actually going to kind of go back to this, but funny enough, about 3 weeks later, I met someone in the emergency department who was admitted for suicidal ideation. And this was like, I knew right away, oh man, this feels like deja vu being here with this guy. And so what he said, he told me, so he tried drinking himself to death. He's an alcoholic, and he said that he had, and I checked the notes from the social workers and others, so I kind of knew a bit about him, but he was telling me that 4 people in his family died of drinking themselves to death. And this guy was really, I had never seen despair like this before. He was saying things like, God hates me, and I've wasted my life. And when you confront something like that, and I was sort of coming, I was drawing on, or at least reflecting from the experience I had with my friend Sam, and realizing I can't just give this guy some like flowery, nice words or whatever to just sort of paper over his extreme despair, right? And so it was really this first time of feeling and letting myself feel like myself completely, have nothing to give, right? Sort of running up against this wall and realizing, I almost like kind of laughed at, to myself, like, I have nothing I can do here for this guy. And yet that moment was really, I think, pivotal, because I wasn't trying to just wave it away. I was letting that be, that sort of sense of helplessness. And it was a real moment of surrender to kind of just trust the silence and whatever followed. So he said this at a certain point. He said, I've heard one time that our bodies are like temples, and I feel like I've desecrated mine. And he had before mentioned how his little apartment in San Francisco, where he receives sort of welfare checks, he says he just pretty much waits for his check and then he buys alcohol. And his apartment is littered with these bottles of vodka. And I had that image in my mind, and I was just sort of sitting there, and I thought, where you are right now is this quiet, clean hospital room. I said, this feels like a clean temple where you are. And we got to talk, we had this amazing conversation about, he was using this language around, feeling, when I asked, how did you get to the hospital? Why did you even think to come? And he said, I felt like I had this spark in me that wasn't going to let me completely go all the way and take my life. And I said, well, maybe that's something to trust in. Maybe that's something that you can rely on, that really like wants life and wants your life to be safe, protected. And so what was so pivotal about this experience for me was that, again, it wasn't a matter of infusing hope into this guy, like grabbing a syringe and just inoculating him with something that I could give him. It was really being patient to kind of tease out their own sense of consolation and inspiration and hope. Okay, and it was a very subtle thing, and it, maybe objectively didn't look all that different. And it's not like I did much that was different, but there was something subtle and yet very important about that difference. So I wanted to juxtapose those two experiences. One, because they were so close to each other, chronologically, and there was something surreal about almost having a second chance to do this again. Sitting down with someone and like shutting my mouth, and trying to resist giving something to this guy. So the next experience actually goes back a ways, and it was a time that it probably would have been helpful for me to remember this when I was doing treatment. And I fled the hospital. I had been there for about 7 days, and I wasn't clearing my chemo. For whatever reason, my system wasn't really clearing this methotrexate. And I was getting like cabin fever. I just wasn't doing well. I wasn't eating, and I couldn't take it. And I remember the doctor, the day I left, he came in and he said, "Oh, your numbers are good. You're ready to go." And I was like, and he would only stop in for like a minute every day. And I was just like sitting there like, a prisoner waiting to get out of this place. And I said, "Are you sure? Like, that's a big drop in my levels. Can you check it again?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure, but I'll check it again." Comes back. He's like, "Oh, I was wrong. I messed it up. Sorry, you're staying." And then he just leaves, like chuckling. And I was like, I am leaving this place. Like, I need to get out of here. And so I left. And I wasn't really thinking straight, obviously. And I can't even say I was advocating for myself. I wasn't really thinking straight. But if anyone had tried preaching to me at that moment, or for doing anything, trying to reason with me, I would have stormed out. And luckily I didn't have a confrontation. I just lied and said I was going to take a shower, and they de-accessed my port. I snuck out with my cane, and I left. And it was like this great escape. And so what happened though is, of course, phones are ringing off the hook. Everyone in my family is getting a call. And I finally, they're like, "You need to come back. Your kidneys can't take this. You have too many drugs." And I was like, "I've got my Leucovorin and I've got Gatorade. Like, tell me what to do. I'll just flush this thing out myself." So I was trying to reason with them, but also not give in. But anyways, long story short, there was one person that I felt I could text and talk to, and it was actually Paul Farmer. And I texted him. I told him, "Paul, I fled the hospital, AMA. They want me to come back. I don't know what to do." And he was like, "All right, let's talk. Let's get on the phone and talk." And Paul, what he did is he listened. And he made something clear to me, whether he said it explicitly or not, I don't really remember, but he said something to the effect of, "I'm on your side and I hear you." And he said, he really listened to me for about 30 minutes, and then he said, "You know what, I'm going to talk to your attending. I'm going to see what we can do here. Maybe you can stay at home." But I trained this guy, first of all, because Paul knows everyone in Boston. And so he did. He talked to the guy, and he called back, and he said, "Phil, again, I totally get where you're at. Some of this stuff is protocol-driven, unnecessarily. I totally hear you, but you have to go back. Your levels are too high. This isn't safe. You're going to damage your kidneys." And I was like, "All right, I'm going to do it. That's fine." And it wasn't a logical thing. I really think it had something to do with the quality of the interaction and maybe the trust that we had built over time, but it was really something more about really connecting with and accompanying someone on this level that was deeper than just the logic of, "You should do this because it's good for your health," right? And I think this is a great story that I somehow, forgot when it was me sitting with my friend Sam, and not so much with the other guy, because I think I handled that a little better in the sense that I wasn't such a know-it-all about it, right? But if I had really kind of tapped into that sense of helplessness that I felt in that moment, that would have served me, I think, better with my friend Sam. So this next quote, this is actually something I said to my mom very early on in treatment. which was kind of cryptic at the time, and I didn't really know what I meant. I probably still don't totally know what I mean here, but it's this very confusing thing where I said, people can only help me when they first accept their own helplessness. And I think I was responding kind of in a concrete and sort of superficial sense to this sort of barrage of like attention and people, you know, well wishes and stuff, very, very, very well-intentioned people, but sort of smothering me with kind of like, what can I do for you? Like, you're sick, you have cancer, this is terrible, I need to do something for you. And it was sort of, it was stifling, sort of. And some people did it, you know, in a way that worked better with me. But I think what I was sort of articulating here is I needed people to first acknowledge that they weren't going to be able to ultimately rescue me from this. They weren't going to be able to pull me out or swap places with me or just wave this away. And when they were able to do that, perhaps on a totally subconscious level, that's when they could actually like be with me, right? And so I think there was something there about acknowledging that to then really connect with me and then perhaps do something helpful, you know? So it's a very paradoxical thing, but I think there was some truth to it. And so I wanted to share this. This was something, you know, reflecting back on this time shortly after my diagnosis that I wrote. I said, I didn't want to fill the silence with logistical details like the doctor had, the one who had given me the diagnosis, and sort of hastily tried to say, okay, here's what we're going to do next. I wasn't simply going to operationalize it, managing the experience by cutting it up into pieces, into an endless series of benchmarks and goalposts. Everyone else would do that. That was their job now. But I had to respect the opening, to look out through the hole that had been torn in the routine, the order, the control of our day-to-day. I needed to help others look out into that emptiness, to not get lost, hastily trying to fill it with tasks, struggling to patch it over with a to-do list. Okay? So again, I don't know if I would have even been able to articulate much of any of this at the time, and I also don't know if it's totally accurate to now overlay it onto that experience, you know, a few years out now. But I really think that in order to really meet me where I was at, people had to let go of the to-do lists. They had to move past them and sort of sit on the edge of this abyss next to me and look out into the darkness with me, right? And that sounds kind of morbid. It sounds like, oh, what? Like, we're trying to do stuff here. We're trying to save your life, right? But again, I'm talking about really meeting the person where they are at. And that is a place of radical unknowing, right? And helplessness and uncertainty. And so even if you are the technician who's doing the things, you know, you're trying to, there is still a way, and I think there's a value in sort of at least having an appreciation for that kind of accompaniment, right? Where you really do recognize where that person is at and sort of tap into that or enter it, right? Your own sense of, I can't totally control this, right? And me accessing that is actually a way of meeting that person, right? So one other thing I'll say here is that in the context of medical providers, you know, some patients will be happily focused on the task list, depending on the day, the stretch of the road that they're on. But there will be moments, especially with critical and terminal illness, where they won't be focused on that. And those will be the holes, right? The emptiness that can't be filled. And it's in those moments when you will find that your toolkit also has a hole and it is empty, right? No technical intervention is going to at least be able to satiate or fulfill or satisfy or put at ease that person. And if they aren't your patients, they will be your loved ones, or perhaps you yourself. You will find these moments again where you're hitting the wall or where you're running dry with things to do or say. And I think that, even if it is the periphery of our human experience, I think that is something incredibly important, because I think it's fair to say that all healthcare is palliative care, right? It's kind of a morbid way to look at it, but what are we doing? We're patching ourselves up to get a little further down the road, right? And we ultimately won't be able to patch things up, right? So in that sense, right? If we're operating often to just give ourselves some more time, some more functionality, some more comfort, right? We will ultimately reach those moments of breakdown. And I don't think, this is probably the one thing I want you to leave with, I don't think that's a despairing thing. I think it can be incredibly life-giving if we have the courage to kind of face it directly. And so, again, this does seem very, very scary, and it is. But facing this is really something that I think is part of our mandate as humans, and sort of embodying that humanity more fully. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about how a lot of what I'm saying runs against the grain of medical culture, right? Especially in this country and developed areas of the world where there's a lot of focus on technology, on advanced pharmacology, and other interventions, right, to stave off death and to extend life, right? And so one thing that's really important is, I think, to look back a little bit and realize how much the ideals of the Enlightenment have stayed with us. And if you're not a history buff, I'm not a history buff. The Enlightenment was a time when, at least the Western world was starting to realize we can control nature. We can come to understand how these systems work and actually control it. Does anyone know what's happening here on this left, on that painting on the left? It's kind of hard to see, but has anyone seen this before? Do you know what that is depicting? So there's this guy who's like staring out at the viewer, and there's a bird in a glass tank there, and then there's all these people having different reactions to that bird. So the bird is actually dead. What he's done is he's created a vacuum. I'm not sure who the scientist is that this is depicting, but he's basically discovered that if you suck air out of this glass enclosure, this bird dies, right? And there wasn't really a theory of respiration or air molecules at that point, but they were discovering, and I think that's what's represented here in this case, is like, we have the power to create and destroy life, like it was this God moment where we were realizing we were uncovering the laws of nature, and we were becoming the makers of that, and sort of the architects of it. And here's another depiction of sort of this mechanistic conception of the body, right, as these parts and gears and things, and again, seeing the body as a machine that we could fix. And that mentality, it shouldn't sound like something from 400 years ago. It's something that very much continues to this day, of seeing patients and maybe parts of patients' bodies as technical problems for us to solve. That's not a bad thing. It's just a natural way of how science has progressed and how it's changed our views of nature, and I would include human bodies within that, right? So that leads me to this point. We're at this stage now. Think about like moving from us living in like little, dwellings, and a lot of people in the world still live this way, like barely protecting themselves from the elements of nature, right? From the rain and the heat, whatever. Sort of protecting themselves with more and more sophisticated enclosures and shelters and things like that. And then we've got buildings, and we've got glass, and we've got air conditioning, and we've got more and more things that are actually shutting nature out, right? We're controlling more and more variables to keep ourselves comfortable or well, right? And I think an ICU, or perhaps even like an isolation ward, is a great example of that, where all these variables are being controlled, right? And so, let's see. Right, so every aspect of the clinical environment is being controlled. Virtually every unknown variable has been removed: temperature, light, fluid, and nutrient intake. All of that's being measured. And yet, and this was something I thought about when reflecting on my own cancer experience, what's happening inside of me, in my mind, it's utter wilderness, right? We think like, oh, no, you're in a hospital and we've got it under control. We know exactly how all these biochemical processes work, and we know how to fine-tune what we're giving you, and all the kind of, this very kind of mechanistic understanding of what's happening. And yet, I think that we sort of fail sometimes to realize, and again in those perhaps periphery, or I might call them liminal moments, when we really realize like the awe-inspiring reality of nature, right? How much mystery is infused in it, right? And how far beyond our understanding and control so much of what happens in life, and not just like in a place like this where you will succumb to the elements very quickly without human intervention, right? But even again, within our own body, seeing that as a place of wilderness. Okay, and I think a point here too, because again, this could sound really like just doomsday, like scary, whoa. I think it's a very fine line. The word awe captures this very well, right? Because awe is like the boundary between fear and wonder, right? Like when we say awe-inspiring, we normally think of that in a positive sense, but like it's something more than that. It's something like, and we see this maybe, you know, if you've been out hiking, whatever, there's something like tremendous about how powerful nature is in both its dangerous aspects, right, and how it threatens our integrity bodily, right, perhaps in other ways, but also like the genius of nature, right, like the intrinsic way that it promotes life and protects life, and how our bodies can do that, right? So there's both like this terrifying unknown of all the things that could go wrong, right, and cause a breakdown in that machine, but also all the mysterious ways that these healing processes can happen beyond our understanding, right? So, oh, okay. So I really like this quote. This is from Martin Luther, not MLK Jr., but 16th century theologian. He was the, kind of Protestant Reformation guy. This is what he said: "If you truly understood a single grain of wheat, you would die of wonder." Again, a little like, ooh, that seems a little harsh. But I think what he's getting at there is, again, we take for granted that we sort of know how cell division works, right? Like I've studied it in a book. I know what the chromosomes do. I know, how whatever all these molecules down to a chemical level, how they work. I can explain how we get from A to B, but really, if you look and see, like from A to B is an utter mystery. Like why does it work that way? How does it work that way? There is so much mystery and almost magic, you could say, that's kind of like that creates not just like a single cell dividing, but like a whole organism. Like that is something truly marvelous, and I think our sort of sense of wonder has been dulled or maybe hidden, right, by sort of our conceptual and technical understandings of these processes, right, where we create machines out of them rather than seeing them as these mysterious and miraculous life processes, right? Processes sounds a little too technical, but mystery, I think, is a great word to use there. So I think where this kind of touches back into healthcare is for me, the reality is that we are witnesses to, or midwives of, the healing process, okay? We are not, at least not in a total sense, creators or architects of it. There are incredible things we can do with our technology, and yet that should not lead us to forget, right, about that utter mystery that surrounds that tiny island of knowledge that we are often sitting on, right? That we think, well, yeah, that explains it all, or that's sufficient, and it's like it's a very small thing. And again, it seems like a scary thing, but I think really looking out into the darkness, I used that imagery before, out into like seeing where Earth is in the universe, right? Like that sense of awe that comes from that kind of paradigm shift is something that I think can be really helpful. So the next thing here, there was comes from an older Jewish tradition, but it said of this one rabbi that he carried 2 slips of paper, one in each pocket. On one he wrote this scripture verse, "For my sake the world was created," and on the other slip of paper he wrote, "I am but dust and ashes." And what he would do, he'd have those in each pocket, and he would take each one out in alternating succession when it was necessary, to remind him of these two realities, right? And I think I was hinting at this before, like the utter majesty and miracle that is human life, you know, and how we really like are divine. You know, we are godlike in the sense of our ability to create and act freely and whatnot. And yet we are also mortal. We are finite. We come from the dust and return to it, right? So it's really kind of holding both those things. It's not one canceling out the other, right? But it's being able to hold those in tension. And I think that we've lost the second piece of paper, or we buried it too deeply in our pockets as a society, at least as a technologically advanced society, right, that has many means, again, of saving and extending life, right? And so we often forget that all of our immortality projects will amount to nothing more than that dust. And that's not to say that we can't do things for future generations, right? For instance, getting serious about climate change, trying to improve the world, make it better for future generations. That's not what I'm saying there. But I mean our personal immortality projects. Like a mentor of mine in Boston, he says, there's one thing you never see behind a hearse, a U-Haul, right? You're not taking your stuff with you to death. Like it's gone, you know, there's no point in thinking that you're at least personally going to accumulate anything that's going to go with you, right? And it doesn't really matter what your theology of death is. But again, just reminding ourselves, and this is, you know, perhaps very Buddhist as well, like meditating on impermanence, right? Which again, seems really morbid and like, why would I ever want to do that? There's a lot of wisdom and insight, and that can be a very sort of fertile ground for compassion, which I think is vitally important for healthcare professionals. So this is a quote from a psychoanalyst. He says, "The doctor is no longer able to see his or her wounds, his or her own potential for illness. He or she sees sickness only in the other. He or she objectifies illness, distancing him or herself from his or her own weakness, elevating him or herself and degrading the patient." Okay? So like I was saying about sort of the visual there of the ICU versus the utter wilderness, we externalize that wilderness. We put it out beyond ourselves, that mystery and that unknown and what is beyond our control. We say that's, and again, I'm not trying to say, well, shame on us for doing that. It's a very natural thing, right? But it does have important ramifications, how we do that externalizing of the unknown, right? And especially in a medical setting, when the doctor loses sight of that can be, like you said, a degrading thing, right? It distances the patient from the provider. So one other thing, a very good book, I was actually just talking to John about this, written by Atul Gawande, who's a surgeon in Boston. He wrote the Checklist Manifesto and some other well-known books. But one last year called Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End. I highly recommend it. It's a really great book, but he wrote, "I learned about a lot of things in medical school, but mortality wasn't one of them." Okay, you might think, what? Like that's what medical school is. You're learning about disease processes. But I think he means it in a deeper sense. You know, mortality in this kind of more existential way. And also in a technical sense of like helping people die, right? Again, the focus is so often on struggling to keep them alive, not necessarily helping them transition towards death, right? And past death. John, I just want to check in. So what's the time?
3:30.
Okay. 3:30 is...
Downstairs.
Okay. So I got a few more minutes. So I want to kind of think about what I want to do. Okay. So I guess the last thing that I'll say here is, I'm just going to kind of, yeah, let's do that. Okay. So the last thing I'll say here is, I think it's really, really key here. The whole point of this talk is to really remind ourselves when I say the wounded healer, I take to mean woundedness as being those points of our limited nature and our finitude and our inability to fully know or fully control. And so to be in touch with that, like I was saying before, to really acknowledge your own helplessness, that can be an empowering thing, right? To enter back into that place of unknowing that I probably would have benefited from if I had said, you know what, I don't know what to do here or what this is like. And you might say, but that's not my job as a doctor. I'm here to fix people. I'm here to do things, save their lives. Like they can have somebody else do that. I think that it will make you a better professional, a better healthcare provider if you can look into this at least for yourself, right? About those holes, right? Those points of mystery where you feel your incompetency really pushing on you, and that mystery kind of pushing against you. Okay, so the last thing I'll say here is that this one little vignette, when I was volunteering in Peru, there was an old man at this nursing home that I was working at who had fallen in the middle of the night and he had broken his hip. And in the morning, we were rushing him to this busy clinic to get his hip taken care of. And we got there, it was just really busy. I was riding with him in the back of the van and he's moaning and stuff. We get there, it's a really busy emergency department. He's just lying on a stretcher, not being tended to. And I'm sitting there just thinking, how, I feel so helpless to do anything for this guy. And so something funny happened. Our driver, he comes in with this snack with a piece of bread and a juice for this guy. And the old man is nibbling on it and he's sort of concealed underneath the sheets draped over him. And I'm sitting there watching him and I'm exhausted and I have this pity for him as he's kind of littering himself with crumbs and he's peering out at me. And then this is what happens. He breaks his bread roll in half and he hands it to me. And I have this kind of sense of no, you're the guy with the broken hip. I'm not even hungry. You can't. And he sort of forced it on me. And he just dismissed it. He's like, no, you're going to eat it. And so I'm eating there and he's sort of smiling, as he's doing this. And this is what I said reflecting on it. Moments like these continue to deepen my understanding of what it means to embrace the non-doing. It comes to mean being brave enough to disarm myself, to set aside my intellectual firepower and self-protective shields, and to enter into another's chaos, not to do for them, but to simply be with them. It takes courage to sit in that silence, often empty-handed, and humbly accept the lesson that feeble man so beautifully demonstrated that day, that I am as much the patient as he is the healer, that he is not a broken machine idly waiting for the non-broken, the privileged, the fortunate among us. I believe that those we intend to serve have bread to offer us every day, humble reminders that we are co-creators in the promotion of life, gentle invitations to discard our pity and crawl down into the pit with another. In these precious moments, we're able to see our shared vulnerability as humans and to simply open ourselves to it, perhaps without much of any real hope of fixing anything in that moment or hour or day. So I'm going to end there. I want to thank you guys for showing up. I really appreciated doing this, and I don't know if we'll have any time for questions. I was in tunnel vision there. I skipped a lot of slides, but thank you guys. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. It's kind of a personal one, but you got pretty personal too, I guess. I've never had cancer, so this wouldn't be a specific thing for me, but do you ever find yourself feeling like you might be talking to someone and you just want to blurt out, well, I get it, I've had cancer, and then, for us to be able to then translate to some other experience we might have had that's similar. We see it when a mirror in a patient.
Yeah.
I've been through something like this, but that may or may not be
right.
Yeah,
it's funny. I don't know if anybody was at the panel, but there was the exact question about this. It was just a really great question, and I'll kind of repeat myself in saying, I think you're right that having cancer, especially as a young adult, is a rare thing, at least in this part of the world. But it's what you're speaking to is a very universal thing, because we all have life experiences that we could draw from and be like, hey, I know that's a natural part of connecting with people, is being able to connect in that way and say, I can relate. But I think it's really dangerous for me, and I've sort of learned this through trial and error, mostly error, is that I can't assume that I've been there. Even when I'm most compromised when I'm with a young adult with cancer, right? Because I think, I've been there, I know what that's like, I've done chemo, a ton of hospital time, whatever. And I think it's so much better and more effective to go into it again from more of a place of not knowing. One thing I didn't get to here, but I think was really important, one of my CPE supervisors, the chaplaincy work, he said, your wisdom is not rooted in your intellect, it's rooted in your pain. And I think, again, maybe sort of coupling those terms, pain and woundedness, I think what he meant there is like, not so much operating out of like my processing of the experience and what I learned and the insights that I can now like give to someone or whatever, but really tapping into the pain of the moment, which was a lot of uncertainty, right? In sense of like, I don't know what to do here and whatever. And that actually being able to root myself in that's where like wise action and wise speech can come from. And so I think maybe that kind of speaks to that is really, and it's a hard thing to do because especially coming out of an experience like that, I like want to carry the U-Haul of my cancer experience and like bring it, like set up shop and be like, look, and I have to remember like, I really, the most valuable thing I've taken from that is nothing, in the sense that like, I am more empty-handed now when I meet people, and I think that's a wonderful thing, to be comfortable doing that, and it's not often a comfortable thing for medical professionals. And I'm not saying you can't have tools that you are using, but there's a way of operating on that level still, with, again, rooting yourself not in your intellect, but in your pain, however that translates for you, right? And that's a way of, again, connecting with that person on that level. So, yeah, thank you. Is there another question? Yeah.
So I'm a second year at Loyola, actually. And one of the things that we do is we get to shadow chaplains as part of our first year, which is one of the most insightful experiences that we had. But it gets lost very easily after first year that experience. So you mentioned being rooted, and what are you thinking, like some good things as medical students that we can do to stay rooted with that feeling and carry it through as like rotation starts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point to because a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about, it might not sound that practical. You're like, well, I've got like assignments and real logistical like constraints, and I don't know, how I translate this in a concrete, practical sense. I think it's important to be realistic about what those constraints are, But another thing is, and I mentioned this too, is that most importantly, I think it's being intentional about recognizing the importance of tending to and nurturing and cultivating that sense of what I might call like optimism or hope or inspiration, right? That is the reason, the real like pulsing heart of why you're in this field and why you're doing this work. And that's something that needs attention, and it needs like nurturing, because if it's totally neglected, if you assume that all the caring stuff is just going to come along hand in hand with the technical training, you'll notice that the technical training will overwhelm all of your time and energy and focus. And the other stuff, right, that sort of cultivation of these sort of these deeper values, right, and not just in an abstract sense, but in a lived way, that will wither if it's not tended to. So I would just say the importance of recognizing the importance of carving out that space and time, whether it's like 30 minutes a week or something, to do something, some gesture or activity of self-care, right? Whether it's like a reading that isn't like pharmacology or something, like something that's going to be nourishing in a spiritual or mental or emotional way, that allows you to kind of tap back into what inspires you. I can't even say what that is. Like maybe it's global health stuff. Maybe I heard somebody saying like, I'm going to listen to some of these recordings when I'm like in finals, because that reminds me of why I'm here, what really excites me, So like follow that that hum, whatever's resonating. And it might not have much to do with medicine. It could be art. It could be whatever. But you'll hopefully see those interweaving as you move forward and keep that alive. Whatever is really resonating for you. So,
Thank you. One more.
Either questions? I'm trying to see what I might have.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
I guess kind of more personal question for you. What is your, I guess, maybe you don't have a planned trajectory of how you want to, utilize your training in seminary school. I know
Yeah.
I have a friend in seminary, and she's going into the naval chaplaincy corps.
Okay.
So I'm just curious as to, given your background,
Yeah.
it's pretty unique and kind of where you're thinking of going with that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
If you even have any
I mean, I was trying to point to it with maybe I'll, and things are starting to move right now where I am getting more involved with the global health stuff that I was doing, because I kind of put that on hold when I started grad school. But that is kind of emerging as something that I can maybe see as an integration of the divinity school stuff and the global health stuff, is the palliative care work in some of our sites, in particular Rwanda and Haiti. So that's a possibility. I'm kind of chewing on maybe going further, doing a doctoral degree in theology. And then hospital chaplaincy, I'm going to do a bit more of that and try to focus on end-of-life care with that. So I'm just going to kind of try to be patient with it and let it unfold. For now, though, it's awesome. It's all these really wonderful things that are kind of interweaving, and we'll see kind of how it pans out. So, yeah.
I'm going to sneak in one more question.
Yeah.
If we really want to learn how to add the caring aspect of medical practice on top of the technical aspect, but we're uncomfortable exploring that area or don't really know how, what are some ways that we can?
Yeah. I would say talk to a chaplain. Because chaplains, as you probably know, they're not just there for patients, and they're not even just there for family members of patients. They're there for health professionals too. And a lot of the work I was doing was I wouldn't say small talk, because it wasn't just chatting about movies. It was usually pretty real conversations with nurses, but just when they have a few minutes, or doctors or whoever. So I think chaplains are great people to just bounce ideas off of. What is aggravating for you in your day-to-day, or what is kind of almost like an Ignatian discernment, giving you, you're finding desolation or consolation, and sort of exploring that with somebody who kind of speaks that language, I think can help kind of point you towards different areas for you to explore. I mean, there's a wealth of really great literature. One person I'd highly recommend is Rachel Naomi Remen, who wrote Kitchen Table Wisdom. She's a physician, now retired in San Francisco, but she speaks very well to, and she's not really from a particular spiritual tradition. She's just kind of, speaking more generally about these kind of other dimensions of healthcare, and she's someone who moved from a very technical practice of medicine to palliative care, and so she sees both sides of that and really speaks very directly and accessibly to medical professionals. So I would check out her work, and then who knows, that could kind of branch into other stuff. But for me, reading is a huge way to kind of find some nourishment in that and light up kind of connections that might lead you to smaller stuff on the side if you can carve out that space and time. All right, guys, I think we're going to do it there. Thank you again. Yeah. Hey, yeah. What's your name? Andrew. Do you want to say yes at all? You don't need